Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining our quick start training session. My name is Chris. I'm going to be taking you through our presentation today. And we will start off here at the top with a little bit of housekeeping. I just want to remind everyone that we are using Zoom for our presentation today, and it is a muted session, so everyone will be on mute by default. But if you do have questions, the best way to get them asked is to use that Q&A button down at the bottom of your Zoom window. And that way you can enter in your question anytime throughout the presentation, and then either myself or one of my colleagues will answer and get back to you. And then, of course, if you need to make any adjustments to your audio settings, you have those available in your Zoom controls as well. Quick agenda. We are in our overview and introduction. That's what we're doing right now. And then we're going to dive into some samples. So these are real world samples created by our real world customers that will kind of give you an idea of some of the flexibility of the tool, as well as some ideas for what you might want to use in your, first timelines yourself. Then we will get into an actual demonstration of Office Timeline. We'll look at building timelines through different methods, talk about all the features and functionalities, and give you guys some great tips and tricks to get started. So right up at the top, we got to answer that burning question of what the heck is Office Timeline, right? And so basically what Office Timeline is, it is a PowerPoint add-in that allows you to take some of those complex project plans, that complex project data that you're seeing or managing in some of your tools like Excel, MS Project, or wherever you may be keeping track of it, and bring that into a tool that allows you to create boardroom ready, highly professional, high quality visuals that you can easily create one and then keep up to date as things change. And so we want to do exactly what it says there in that box with those bullets, is to save time and of course improve the communication between yourself and your project stakeholders, as well as impress your audience, whoever they may be. And then we are going to check out those real world timelines like I mentioned before. So jumping into our first example here, we see that we have probably all of the simplest or most common elements of a timeline. We have that time scale up at the top that is showing us a time intervals by month. Attached to that time scale, we have some milestone objects with dates and titles attached to them. And then down below, we have some tasks. Even getting a little fancy there, you can kind of see those diamonds in that one task where we're kind of embedding a milestone right into our task. But other than that, that's pretty much it. We have the simplest building blocks of a timeline here on this slide. And then some of the other elements that you see on this slide, like the table down at the bottom showing goal, owner, and target, or the executive summary, or even the title of the slide itself, those are all things that are just managed by Microsoft PowerPoint objects. And then here's another very simple example, again, using our light plan and using some of the simplest building blocks of a timeline. We have that time scale this time at the bottom with some milestones sprinkled throughout. And then we have tasks and milestones there in our actual timeline. And in fact, we're getting a little creative with this one where we've kind of visually bundled our tasks and milestones into System 1 and System 2. Maybe something to consider if you're running agile planning, sprints, that kind of thing. Moving on to our next example, a lot more going on this slide, but from my perspective, it's still very clear, very easy to read, very understandable what's trying to be conveyed. We are now using our plus plan in this example. So you're seeing some additional elements here. For example, we have swim lanes. So those tasks are being divided into integrations, business apps, BPI, etc. We have our time scale up at the top, but in this example, again, using our plus plan, we have multiple timescales available. So in this example, we're using quarters as well as years. And then again, I'm just going to point out some of the other elements that you're seeing on this slide. For example, the table off to the right with the color coding and some of the, the product and names, the departments and names that you see at the top there. These are all just being added in with, tables and text boxes here within Microsoft. So not necessarily connected to what Office Timeline is putting onto the slide. And then continuing on here in our plus plan, you'll see that we're using a lot of those higher planned features here. We are using swim lanes, again, just like the last example, but in this case, we're taking advantage of those sub swim lanes. So even further dividing where we can organize our tasks and milestones. And then up at the top, we are using that multiple time scale, like I mentioned before, but taking full advantage of it here and using all three of our time scales. Another thing you'll notice in this example is that we are making use of dependencies as well. So you'll see the lines and arrows indicating dependencies and predecessors. And even down where you see it says campaign release with the red highlight, we're even making use of our critical path there as well. Now we're jumping into our expert plan. And in this example, you're seeing a lot of the elements that we've already seen before. So we have swim lanes, we have sub swim lanes. We're using that triple timescale up at the top. In this case, we're using months, quarters, and years. You'll see that we have dependencies. So we're using a real sprinkling of all of the Office Timeline features here. But one thing that you'll notice specifically here is that under those tasks and around some of those milestones, you're seeing those red bars or red and green highlights. Those are to indicate plan versus actual. And so what this feature allows you to do is create baselines as well as visualize where the actual of that task or milestone actually landed, and then use our conditional formatting to highlight that in red or green or whatever you prefer so that you can visualize that on the slide. And that is a feature only available within our expert plan. And then one last example here, again, making a lot of great use of the features that are available in Expert. I can tell you that this example was also designed using a custom theme, only available in the Expert plan. So the ability to kind of dictate colors, fonts, shapes, outlines, the color of the dependency lines. You'll even see in this example that making fine tunings to that conditional formatting of plan versus actual that I mentioned before. And all of that is available to you. Obviously you can style anything you want, but exclusive to the expert plan is your ability to save that as a custom template, share it with other team members, and also, use it as your default going forward in other timelines that you create. All right, and then before we jump into the demo itself, I just want to highlight some of the areas that you're going to be using when you are in Office Timeline. So the three areas of use primarily are going to be the edit timeline, edit data, and the style pane. When you're creating or working on a timeline, those are like the three buttons you're going to be looking for, majority of the time. And to give you an idea of what happens in those views, in edit timeline, this is where you have the ability to adjust the layout. You can actually place milestones, place tasks, use drag and drop to actually grab and move elements, adjusting where they are visually on the timeline, as well as, adjusting things like the date and the placement of those elements around your tasks and milestones. Then the edit data view, allows you to adjust the order of tasks and milestones, allows you to adjust the dates, remove, add elements. But in this case, you're looking at it more in like a grid view, kind of more visually like you might see it in Excel or in whatever project management tool that you might be using. And then lastly, you have the style pane, and that's where you can go to, uniquely customize your colors, shapes, lines, outlines, fonts, really anything getting into the nitty gritty of your design. And like I mentioned, if you are using the expert plan, you can, once you've done all that nitty gritty of your design and your beautification of your slide, you can kind of save that as a custom theme so that you can use it going forward. And then just a brief overview of what the process for creating a timeline looks like. Step one, in some way or another, you're going to be bringing your data into Office Timeline, right? So you're going to be bringing your project data in, whether you're typing it in or whether you're importing it from Excel, Projects, Smartsheet, Wrike, Jira, and so forth. Obviously, that's the preferred way. But anyway, you bring your data in. Next, you're going to create the layout. So you brought your data in, and now you maybe want to make some adjustments to, where headers are visually, where the dates are aligned. You can use that drag and drop functionality to adjust your timeline to your suiting. And then you're going to get into the beautification of it, right? You can use that style pane to style your timeline, change the milestone shapes and colors, task shapes, colors, outlines, fonts, sizes, really anything you can think of. You can customize it and then go from there. And then if you have imported that data in from Excel or one of the other project management tools, and you have a source file that is your source of truth, when you make changes in that file, dates change, tasks move around, things are getting updated, you can simply refresh within Office Timeline to make sure that your visualization of those changes stays current. All right, next let's jump directly into our demonstration. So I'm just going to grab another PowerPoint file for us to use. I'm just going to jump into a blank PowerPoint here, and then I'm going to navigate up to the top of PowerPoint in the PowerPoint ribbon and locate the Office Timeline tab. Once you click that, that's going to bring you into all the buttons and features and bells and whistles of Office Timeline that you're going to be using when you're working with your timelines. To get started, I'm going to click this new button right up here in the top left corner. That's going to bring up my new timeline wizard. It's going to give you all the jumping off points to get you started with your timelines. So whether you're starting a timeline from scratch, from theme, template, if you're importing your data, you'll notice that you can see some of the recent themes, recent templates, different types of templates like swim lane and timeline templates, all will be available for you to view and utilize here. For our demonstration today, let's go ahead and create a timeline from template. You'll see we have these swim lane templates and timeline templates. We even have some planned versus actual templates in here as well. For our purposes, let's go ahead and choose a swim lane template. In fact, you know what? I'll go ahead and use a timeline template, and let's go with this one, and we'll add some swim lanes in ourselves. So when we're using templates, you'll see that some of the colors, shapes, things like that have already been selected for us. But in the case of templates, it also includes some data to get us started, right? So it's thrown some dates in there, thrown some milestones up, given us a place to get started. And you'll also notice that within Office Timeline, it's already kind of giving us that nudge to say like, hey, you can even use this template, but import your own data. And so that option is available as well. So what I'll do is I'll just take this template and go ahead and click Create Timeline as is, and that's going to bring us directly into our Edit Data tab. So in the Edit Data tab, we can see all of our tasks, milestones, dates, things like that in this kind of like column grid view. But where I'd like to start doing my work is over in the Edit Timeline tab, and this is where we can see that visualization and use the drag and drop environment to edit our timeline. So, for example, we have some of those simple building blocks that we looked at earlier. We have the time scale there in months. We have some milestones sprinkled throughout, right? We have some tasks down here below. And what I can do to start editing this timeline is just simply grabbing elements and start dragging them and dropping them. And so you'll notice here I can drag this milestone left and right, up and down the timeline. And a couple important things are happening here when I do this. You'll notice that the title is coming along with it. Thank you. The date is coming along with it. But importantly is as I slide this up and down the timeline, the date is changing accordingly along with it. So drop that there. Same goes for anything down here. We can move our tasks around left and right. And again, notice that in this case, we have a date range, we have a title, we have a duration. And as I'm moving this task left and right, or this one left and right, you'll notice that all of those elements are coming along with it for the ride, as well as adjusting those dates accordingly with the movements that I'm making. In fact, you'll notice here that I'm taking some of these tasks and I even kind of drag them almost to the edge or the outside of the time scale there. And that just kind of extended the duration of the entire project, right? So pretty easy. And as you can see, pretty quick to adjust some of these elements. Other adjustments that you might make, of course, are like renaming milestones. You can just click into these and type. You can move the position of dates and titles and things like that. So there, I can move those to not be on the top of the task. I can move them to the left. You'll notice that also saves me a little bit of vertical space there. right? If perhaps this task is here and I have the space, I could even move tasks and milestones vertically as well. I can even take milestones and move them down off the time scale there and attach them directly to a task down below. Oh, and another cool thing I like to show you is that if you do attach a milestone to a task like this, again, I'm going to do a little drag and drop magic. All those elements I mentioned before, the duration, the date, the title, all of that good stuff is going along with it. And you'll notice that that milestone is now along for the ride, and that date is now changing accordingly to where I move that task. So pretty great there. And then when it comes to, building on top of this and adding more elements to my timeline, I want to direct your attention to the buttons that I have up here at the top of my edit timeline window. So if I want to add more tasks, I can easily do that just by clicking that button there. Of course, you can come down here and title those tasks. I will spare you my slow typing. You can call that task 1. Pretty creative, right? But as you can see, it's just easy peasy. You can just type into those and edit them. If we need to add more milestones, we can do that. You see them popping up there on the time scale. And then if we need to add swim lanes, we can do that up here as well. So I'm just going to choose this drop down. I'm going to add a swim lane. Heck, let's add a couple swim lanes there. And in addition, I'm going to select one of my swim lanes here, and I'm going to add a couple sub swim lanes, which we saw some examples of in our presentation earlier. So we're going to go ahead and add a couple of those. You'll notice those are all coming through untitled, but obviously you can click into those and adjust that. And then what I can do is just start taking some of my tasks and bringing them down here into these swim lanes and kind of organizing things as I like them. Let's say those are going to go into that sub swim lane. This is going to go down below into this one. And we'll move these ones over, and we'll bring those down into the last swim lane down there. And these ones, maybe we'll just keep these ones up here above our timescale and say these ones aren't necessarily tied to any swim lane. So again, all of this drag and drop, all of this is being adjusted, as you'll see in just a moment, in the Edit Data tab as well. But in this place, this is where I like to do the majority of my work. I'm a visual learner, I'm a visual worker. I like to use the drag and drop. It seems very easy, very simple, and far less complicated than creating all these objects in PowerPoint and doing it manually in that way. Couple other function buttons we have here before we move on is if I have a task that I love and I want another one, I can click duplicate up here and that will duplicate it. If there is a task that I like it needs to be part of the data, but I just don't need to see it on my timeline, I can click hide. Don't worry, it doesn't go away forever. I'll show you where you can retrieve that. And if there are any tasks that I just don't want at all, get it out of here, get it off the timeline, get it out of the data. Maybe let's say I can just go ahead and select it and click delete. A couple other things to look at in the drag and drop before we move away is I want to draw your attention to this drop down up here at the top right of the view here where you're going to find advanced tools. If you click on that, you'll notice that we can activate a couple things. One is dependencies. That one is I have turned on. You can also activate critical path along the lines of dependencies. And you can also activate planned versus actual. So real quick, let's take a look at dependencies. I could take any of these tasks. If I give it a click, you'll notice that I have these two black icons on either side here. This is to indicate the start and finish of this task. And then what I can do is I can drag this from the finish, let's say, to the start of this task and create a dependency relationship. Of course, you can do this start to start, start to finish, all of the variations therein you can do. And you can, of course, continue to do this all through. And then when we get to the style phase, you, of course, can style those lines and arrows. Now, a couple things about dependencies. They do have some rules that govern them. Now, in this case, I just tried to drag a task for its start to begin ahead of my predecessor requirement. And so what I've set Office Timeline to do is say, hey, ask me about this if I ever do it. And it's kind of saying, do you want to allow this conflict? Do you want this to be strict in this way, let's say? If you're the kind of person who says, I like the arrows and the lines, it tells a pretty story, but I don't necessarily need Office Timeline to babysit me in this regard, you can say, allow conflicts and remember this, and it'll never ask you again. You can also say, don't allow conflicts and remember this, and it'll never ask you again. I personally like to keep it so that it asks me every time. So for example, if I click don't allow conflicts, it's just going to scoot that task over to like the earliest date where the conflict doesn't arise. Okay, a little bit there on dependencies, and then going back up to our advanced tools, I want to show planned versus actual. If you turn on planned versus actual available exclusively in our expert plan, you'll notice a couple things. So these black bars kind of showed up under each of our tasks. That is to indicate your baseline or your planned. And then you'll notice that if I make any, let's say, changes, as we know, things change in our projects all the time. So let's say the actual of our task actually got moved out a little bit. You'll notice a couple things happening. Obviously, we can visually see that the baseline has dragged there behind the actual. But our conditional formatting has also kicked in here to highlight that milestone and highlight that baseline to say like, hey, this is red. This is, this has gone, behind schedule, or there's been a delay rather. And so that can be indicated. And then conversely, of course, if something was ahead of schedule, our conditional formatting kicks in and that turns green. So a very cool feature, again, only in expert, and there's a lot more that you can do with plan versus actually, just a little bit of a preview there. So before we go ahead and finally, quote unquote, create this timeline, I want to just jump back over to the edit data tab for us real quick to show how things have kind of changed here, right? We had far fewer objects, right? We didn't have the swim lanes. And so what we've done in the edit timeline tab with drag and drop and all the layout changes are then reflected here as well. You'll also notice that because we have planned versus actual, we have two sets of dates, right? So you have your planned dates and your actual dates. So you can also edit that here by, of course, typing and changing it numerically. And then if you were to say deactivate planned versus actual, Office Timeline will ask you, say, do you want to keep the actual dates or did you want to keep the planned dates on your timeline? In this case, I'll keep my actual dates. Actually, I'll just go ahead and click cancel because I want to keep planned versus actual alive for us so that we can take a look at it in the style pane as well. So I'll cancel that. Back over to edit timeline just to give it another view of what it looks like here. Okay, looks great. And then I'm just going to go ahead down and click that green create button down at the bottom right of my screen. Okay, beautiful. So a couple things happened. It rendered my timeline onto the slide. Perfect. That's what I'm looking for. It looks great. It's got the plan versus actual. It's got my dependencies, my milestones, my task swim lanes, all the good stuff. My style pane also opened up automatically to the right of my PowerPoint window, which is great. Now, I mentioned the style pane earlier as that third place that we're going to do a majority of our work. But before I jump into that, I want to put up a big disclaimer here. Now that we have our timeline on the slide, I want to caution you from doing any manual work or any drag and drop work here directly on the slide. That's for a couple of really good reasons, right? If we remember that when we did drag and drop in Edit Timeline, if I grabbed an element like a milestone like this one here, and I drag it over, there was some cool things happening that I pointed out, right? The title and the date were moving along with it, as well as changing the date accordingly to where I'm positioning it on the timeline. That didn't happen here because on the slide, these are all just individual Microsoft PowerPoint objects. And if you make changes like this on the slide itself, it could get messy and it's going to take you a long time. And the worst part about it is if you were to go back into Edit Timeline or Edit Data and make some other changes and click Save, when you come back out of it, you'll notice that all of that work just jutted back to where it was. So you're going to have a hard time. It's going to be very manual. It's going to be messy. And then you're going to lose some of your work on top of it. And so it's just not recommended to make any layout changes here on the slide. If you do need to make out layout changes, that's what Office Timeline's there for, so that you can go in there and use the magic of Edit Timeline. A little bit about the style pane before we create another timeline or two is that I have my style pane open. I can hide or view the style pane using the button up here in my Office Timeline tab in the PowerPoint ribbon. And what the style pane is waiting for me to do is select any of my objects. So in this case, I'm choosing a milestone. And then it's giving me the ability to customize that object. So it has the shape of a square. Let's say I don't like the squares. I think diamonds kind of look cooler. I think they're, of course, I'd like a cooler color than gray. So maybe I'm going to choose purple, has been kind of a favorite of mine lately. I'm noticing that they all are regular size. So let's kind of make it cool and compact. Let's go small. We'll do position above. And then great. So this milestone is now purple and tiny and up above where I really like it. And now I guess I got to go do that individually for each one of my milestones. No, that would be tedious, and I hope that you wouldn't do it that way because we have a function built in to help you with that. So I've changed the shape, the color, the size, the position. I can go down here and click Apply to All, and then I could say, yep, go ahead and apply all of those things or only the things that I select to all of my milestones. And it even asks here, do you want to, basically it's asking, do you want to include the milestones in swim lanes or exclude the swim lanes? I'm going to go ahead and include this time because I see, as you see, I only have one milestone in the swim lane. That's okay. Let's go ahead and give it the diamond shape. Click all, boom. All of them have changed now to purple, diamond, small, even kind of looks cooler down here in the swim lane. I'm glad I made that choice. And great. So if I select a task, same thing. In this case, you know, maybe I don't like the red on red. Maybe I want to do like blue on red. The boxy shape I don't really love. Let's go with like the chevron shape. Maybe I do want to go thin on the tasks as well. So you're kind of seeing the trend here and how this edit goes. And then of course I can apply to all, select of course what design elements I want to include. And I could say, hey, you know what, this is only for this swim lane because I'm going to go do this process again in the other swim lanes and make different choices. So I'll click apply. And then only the tasks in that swim lane were changed. Let's say I go down here real quick, make some similar changes. But in this case, I'm going to go green on red. I don't know, I'm going for a Christmas thing maybe. Let's see, colors, we're going to get thin. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply all again. And this time I'm just going to choose this swim lane. And then those have all been adjusted there as well. Last, there's so much that you can do within the style pane. I do want to mention that our time scale up at the top is also editable in the style pane. Same kind of thing, shapes, colors, etc. But you also have this additional button up here at the top that is for time scale settings. And this is where you can go to turn on and off different time scale intervals. So for example, I want to turn on the middle tier and the bottom tier, and then I can choose, years, quarters, months, or whatever you'd like to choose. And then you have some additional options in there about like intervals and formats, etc. But of course you can just click save, and just like anything else in the style pane, it will make those adjustments to your timeline automatically. Now, the last thing I'd like to show you in the style pane before we move on is planned versus actual conditional formatting. So if you choose a task or a milestone, remember it's going to bring up all of those styling options for you, but you'll notice that up at the top you have the actual and you have the planned. We were making edits to the actual. If I click planned, that's where you're going to get the opportunity to make adjustments to the baseline color. So that would be, in this case here, where there was no delay or advance, it's just black or gray. And then you can go down into the conditional formatting and decide, what elements are going to change color based on its advance or delay. You'll notice that some of these changes are getting made there. I put background color, outline, title color. Really want people to know that this one's delayed. So you can make those adjustments there for both delays and advances. Cool. We made a timeline with just about a piece of every element from light, plus, and expert. Let's take a look at another timeline and how it looks when we're importing our data. So I'm going to jump down here and grab myself an Excel sheet. And here on this worksheet, you'll see what are basically the most simple or required data to create a timeline, which would be the title of your tasks and milestones and the start and end date. Don't worry about the ones there that don't have a start date. Anything that doesn't have a start date or has the same exact start and end date, Office Timeline will see that as a milestone. Everything else, like this one here, develop, excite, ignite, those are all tasks because they have a unique start and end date. Now, a cool thing about this common data here is I can actually just do a little magic trick here and just copy. I'm going to do a little copy paste action right here. I'm going to switch back over to our PowerPoint. I'm going to click new. And this time I'm going to click from start, or start from scratch rather. And this will do what it did last time and open up our edit data tab. And it's just giving us this first line to say, go ahead and get started. Go ahead and start typing in and getting started from scratch. I'm actually just going to delete that one because I copied that data from Excel, and I'm going to go up to the very tippy top of this window here to the top right corner to this very tiny clipboard icon and give that a click. And look at that. It'll just paste that data in that I had in my clipboard. Go check out the visualization of it. Oh, a little high for my liking. Let's drag that down. Looks good. Click create. And I wasn't timing myself, but I had to guess that's about under a minute to create a timeline, just copying and pasting from Excel. So pretty cool there. But just you're copying and pasting, so it's essentially just like copying and pasting in a Word document or something, where it's just a faster way of typing, essentially. So this timeline isn't necessarily connected to that sheet. Just a disclaimer there. But let's take a look at what it looks like when we're actually importing those files. So again, I'm going to go to my new button up here for my new timeline wizard. And this time I'm going to click import data. And then before I continue, I'm just going to jump back to my sheet here to show you exactly what I'm importing. I'm going to jump over here to this one. And so obviously we have more going on in this sheet, right? I've highlighted those 3 columns that we just have to have, right? Title, start date, end date. And we have some additional columns here like phase, sub-phase. We have this column here, sprint, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and some additional columns as well that may not necessarily be needed. So I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint. And in this case, I'm going to choose Excel. And that'll bring up a wizard to walk you through the import process. I'm just going to go ahead and browse a file. I want to point out that we do also have links to learning material, as well as the ability to download an Excel sample. There's also an Excel sample for expert specifically, and that includes planned versus actual. So I'm going to click browse file, hopefully find my file fairly quickly. 1 second here. Oh, there it is. Great. And so first step here is to select which worksheet you're looking to import. The one I had obviously had several sheets, so I'm just going to select from this dropdown which one I want to bring in. And all you're really doing on this step is just confirming, yes, this is my data, and this is my header row. Everything looks good here. Just go ahead and click next. Then here's where you're going to map your columns. So a couple things have been mapped automatically for us, ones we might expect, like those required columns, title, start date, end date. We have a row ID there as well. And then a couple things that didn't get mapped automatically. We have phase and subphase that we've titled these columns, but we kind of know as the project manager that these are our swim lanes and sub swim lanes, or at least that's how we want them visualized. So we can just go in here and manually map those. I select swim lane there, select sub swim lane there. It already found our percentage complete. That's awesome. Some of these other columns we don't necessarily need. And then this column here, sprint, that I've included, that's just for the purpose of filtering. And we'll look at that on the next step. I also should mention on this step is that if you are bringing in planned versus actual using that expert Excel sample, this is where you'll also map which columns are your planned start and end dates and which columns are your actual start and end dates. And you'll be able to enable planned versus actual from the column options up here at the top right. So you'll see that planned versus actual switch. If you turn that on, it will, try and look for those columns, but you'll want to finish that by manually mapping. We'll go to the next step here. And then in this case, this is where you're going to select which rows you want to bring in. You don't have to bring in all your swim lanes or all your rows or all your tasks and milestones. You actually can choose here. I only have about 18 rows here, so it's not really that big of a deal, but I can just go ahead and select all of them and bring them in. Wouldn't be a problem. Now, if you are getting above 50 rows, this is where it starts to get a little messy. We might start to recommend, like, maybe you should filter this in some way and only display a certain segment of your data. So if that's the case and that's something you want to do, you're going to want to look over here to the filter button in the top right and give that a click. And then you're going to be able to filter by some of the elements that you would expect. Basically all of the columns, that you're going to have in your data, right? So you got swim lanes, task, milestones, start and end date. I would say start and end date. Swim lanes are probably common ones to filter by. But we also have that column that I put in that I titled sprint, right? So you can put in your own column and filter by that as well. So in this case, I put sprint, and then I tagged tasks and milestones that I wanted to bring in with the variable y. And so I can apply that filter, and you'll see that immediately brought down the number of rows that I'm going to be bringing into my presentation. So that's how you do it. And then I would just go up here and click this button to select all of the rows. Again, I only have 18, so it's not that bad. I think I might just want to bring them all in. So I'm just going to click the clear filter button, bring all of those back. Again, you can individually select rows if you want, not the best route, but you can also click the top left corner to select all your rows, and then click import. And then again, pretty quick process. Go to your file, import it. I already have a default theme here, so it's already choosing my shapes, colors, things like that. But in addition to that, you have the ability, once you're imported, to go into your edit timeline and start making some fine-tune changes. Maybe you want this title to be up there. You don't like how this date is overlapping here, so I move that there. Maybe I want to save some space here and turn those around and squeeze this like that. Maybe I want to make room on my slide for some of those Microsoft objects that Chris kept mentioning. I can grab my whole timeline and squeeze it over to the left like that. So even though, you've imported your data, you still have some creative control over the look and feel of the timeline. Click save, and that will get saved directly there to the slide. One last important thing about importing data is your ability to refresh that data. Now, if you make changes to your dates and the data here on the edit timeline or in the edit data view, it will not transfer that data back to your spreadsheet, okay? Office Timeline is looking at your project file, your spreadsheet, your MS project, whatever it may be, as the source of truth. So if you make changes there, they can be reflected in your timeline. So if we jump back, let's say, to our sheet here, and we make, some changes, like let's say we change the date, we have to push this out a bit to February. This has to get pushed to October. We're just totally not even going to do the mobile beta anymore, and that's getting deleted. And so we've made some significant changes to our plan. The file is the source of truth. That's saved. We're back in PowerPoint. I'm looking at my timeline. I'm like, okay, this needs to be refreshed to reflect the most correct data. All I have to do is go up again to my Office Timeline tab and look for the Refresh Data button that is now illuminated. Give that a click, and that's going to kind of bring us into a similar feel that we had before, where it's looking for things that have, it's kind of like the import wizard, but it's looking for things that have changed, right? So it's found some dates that have changed, something that I've deleted, etc. And then all I have to do is say, yes, these are valid changes. You can even choose not to bring in particular changes if you don't want to. You can select them and deselect them here on the left. I'm going to bring them all and say, yes, these changes are correct. Hit refresh. And then you'll notice that things moved around based on the changes that I'm bringing in from my data sheet. All right. And in just a short amount of time, we've created some halfway decent, looking, maybe a little bit more than halfway decent looking timelines, just tinkering around. So imagine what you can do with your, data that you've been working on, very meticulously over time. Just import that in, see what kind of timeline you get, and start beautifying it, making layout changes, and seeing how quickly you can get to the finished product of the visualization of your project. So before we wrap up, just going to jump back to our presentation for a couple reminders and sign-offs. So really quick, mentioning that expert edition. So expert edition is going to include your ability to use that plan versus actual, and as well as use the custom themes and custom templates functionality, among other things. So just want shout out for that. If you're interested, please check out our website. And there's also a lot of great information and videos on our knowledge base. And then finally, as far as next steps go, we do have best practices webinars where we go in a little bit deeper, show more examples, and also hear a little bit more from you folks and hear your questions and examples and work through them. If you have not recently, please make sure to update to the latest build of Office Timeline. That's always free and easy to do on our website. And that will make sure you have all the latest and greatest features, functionalities, fixes, and security measures. If you need to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to learning@officetimeline.com. And then we have some additional resources to help you get started. And before I say goodbye to you folks, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, for your participation, and we hope to see you on future webinars. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.